Well, hello you bearded bastards, and welcome back once again to Monsterkiller, Monsterkiller. I just really felt like saying that one last time. Totally worth it. Alright fellas, today we have a bit of a different episode, wherein we're just going to do a little overview of the world in which Monsterkiller resides, known as the Realm of Oracles. Now if we have a look at the map of our world, which unfortunately can't be zoomed out any more than this, a damn shame, we could see our fortress, Monsterkiller, over here to the west, in the red sand desert known as the Born Dunes. A fortress that got its start in granite, early spring of the year 250, and came to its end in Opal of 266, midwinter. This dwarven fortress only lasted for 16 years, but in its time managed to grow from a small hunter's outpost into a flourishing dwarven fortress. Some say its end came because of the questionable judgment of its queen, and still others say that its end came due to its citizens, dwarves who had grown far too comfortable in their lavishly appointed fortress. But who's to say, really? Whatever the case, we know that in its day, Monsterkiller was one of the mightiest citadels to ever pop up here in the Realm of Oracles. Great beasts were hunted, armies crushed, heroes were born, and all of this culminated in the rise of the dwarven nation, known as the Grand Lancers. But I assume you've watched the story of Monsterkiller's rise and fall at this point, and so this probably isn't news to you. But we still have some questions, don't we? I for one really want to know what happened to the dwarven nation after the fall of Monsterkiller, as well as the dwarves who lived there. I personally have never been one to leave off on a kind of mystery ending. I want to know what happens, and I'm sure there's many of you who agree. Now that being said, a lot of what I'm going to talk about today is my own personal headcanon and doesn't necessarily take into account what is actually possible in the game of Dwarf Fortress. I usually don't really like straying too far from what is actually possible in the game, but I figure if we want everything capped off nicely, then you gotta do what you gotta do. I mean, if I didn't end up doing this, then we would have to assume that the dwarves are just sitting in the fortress till the end of time, or until they all died, and that wouldn't be very satisfactory, to me anyways. And on top of that, there's a whole bunch of things I'd really like to draw too, and I figured this would be my best chance to do so. And so yeah, that's gonna be the episode, answering some questions and seeing some neato pictures. And I'm just gonna kind of be rambling for the most part, so I'm not too sure how long this episode's gonna be, but hopefully it's around the half-hour mark. My apologies if it's less or more. But anyways, that's enough of that. Now to the questions. First off, why did I decide to end the series? Well, you see, I was originally hoping to go to 30 episodes with this, and I thought it looked like we were gonna make it there too. Things in Monsterkiller started going downhill in a big way, but we were able to lock up the best and brightest in that little burrow off to the side, which we dubbed Batkiller Court. But a bunch of those guys started being unhappy too, as you can see here. You know, about half of them anyways. Some of them had even started throwing tantrums and stuff, so I knew they wouldn't be able to last in there for very long. And if they did end up lasting in there, what would happen? All our best and brightest are locked up in that little burrow, while all the other dwarves are locked out in the fortress, just killing each other and being generally miserable. And so halfway through episode 26, I kind of decided this has to be it. I'm gonna have to call it to a close. Up till the halfway mark, I didn't realize it was going to be the last episode. I really wasn't planning on it, and so I was as surprised as everyone else pretty much. But again, it's what you gotta do, I suppose. Unless we wanted another 4 episodes of everything just crumbling. I don't think that would have been very fun though. Now first off, let's take a look around the fortress here. A couple things I'd like to show off that were not in the videos. This creepy crab flying over here by this tree is still here, and I had completely forgotten about the thing throughout that entire last episode. So I guess I'm kinda glad it didn't move in. This one here has poisonous gases, so it could have really screwed up our dwarves. But yeah, he's still here. Up here in this tunnel, you can see another dead forgotten beast. There were a few that didn't even make it into the videos. Like this one here. It would have just kind of ended up being a distraction, so we just ignored it. I sent the dwarves out, they killed it, no problem whatsoever. Hardly a side note. And on top of that, up in the first cavern layer here, there are currently 2 forgotten beasts over on the side on this one screen, just locked behind trees, as well as 2 others right here. So that's 4, and another over here as well. 5 forgotten beasts, all currently locked away behind trees. Yeah, I stopped mentioning it because it would just kind of be repetitive, you know? Here we have the great beast lumbering onto the map. Who knows what destruction it will wreak? Oh, and it's stuck behind a tree once more. Great. Oh, and over here at the bottom of the well, you can see there's a dwarf and a dead elf. I don't know how they got down there. I found it kind of amusing though. Here's another thing right here. This is Queen Obok's library, and over on the side, you can see we have one of the necromancers caged up here. I was really hoping to play up an interaction between this necromancer and Obok, and eventually let them out in with the other safe area dwarves, but it never came to pass unfortunately. just kinda ran out of time. And on top of that, up on the surface here, you can see that other necromancer, locked up in this stone contraption. Now there's a wall of fortifications around this dwarf, and beyond that there are some bridges that can be raised and lowered. I was hoping to get this necromancer in here, and then be able to lower those bridges when enemies were passing by, so that it would see all these corpses out here and then reanimate them as zombies. That did not work, not in the least. And I had recorded some big old part in one of the episodes, and it just didn't end up working at all, and so I had cut it out entirely. That being said, I'm going to maintain that it is still canon. Maybe the dwarves who were assembling this project didn't know its true meaning, and so that's why we didn't hear too much about it. Just another of Queen Obak's mad designs. The same thing goes for this guy. Perhaps Obak kept the door in her library sealed, and so nobody knew what was actually in there. That makes sense, right? Just adds to her intrigue a little bit. And, well, I suppose that's really it for things I haven't shown you. And so now that that's out of the way, let's try to figure out where these dwarves went after they left Usheng-Vagush. I'm thinking they left the Born Dunes in Usheng-Vagush behind, and moved eastward, out through these badlands along the coast, away from the frosty barbarity. Keep in mind that a whole bunch of civilizations in that area hated their guts at this point, and so it's kind of what they had to do. Now I'm thinking they went up this way here, to this mountain range, the Mallow Axe, and eventually settled here, Tramelwhip, a fortress that formerly belonged to the Grand Lancers. I mean, I'm sure they all knew about this place, it's not completely forgotten, and so with no other place to go, and a bunch of capable warriors, why not take a stab at it, right? Granted, in this area, there is a different goblin civilization, known as the Midnight of Contests, and their capital is pretty much up to the northwest, maybe a day's travel away, so a move here would lead to all sorts of new trouble, new adventures, new legends, and still a bright new future I'm thinking, which is pretty fun. Wouldn't want the dwarves getting complacent now. We saw what happens when that's the case. So there you have it, that's how the dwarves got here, to Tramelwhip, their new fortress. But what of the dwarves themselves? We should have a closer look at some of those guys, huh? Kinda gotta, I think. Well, we'll start at the most obvious place. Their current leader, King Kulet, Warpfist, as well as his wife, the Queen, Unib, also known as Leechbait, a couple of dwarves with less than flattering nicknames. Yes, in the future these two end up together, ruling over the Dwarven nation. They are only 5 years apart, and having endured all that mess in Usheng-Vagush, they can clearly relate with one another, so it's only natural. One would hope they would have learned a lot from their days in Usheng-Vagush, and I don't think they'll suffer the same pitfalls that Obak did. Not as quickly anyways. But who knows? Hard to say, really. But it's not like they'll be making these decisions by themselves solely, because all the dwarves of Tramelwhip have seen what happened to their former home, and they'll all be there too. Dwarves like Einod, Blue Axe, the leader of Usheng-Vagush's military, who continues to lead the military far into the future. Ever wise and brave, I can't help but picture her playing a bigger part in Tramelwhip's future. All the dwarves respect her wisdom and guidance, especially the warriors, and I would think that she knows best what can befall a careless fortress. And so with those lessons under her belt, I would think that she plays as big a part as the king or queen. Still on the subject of Blue Axe, I can't help but picture what her copper axe must look like in the future. It was already terribly beaten up in Usheng-Vagush's days, so I'd have to assume in this future, the thing's pretty much just a blunted mace. But as we saw, it still does the trick. Those gauntlets too, the forgotten beast shell gauntlets that all the warriors of Usheng-Vagush used, those were pretty unique, huh? I'm not too sure how many pairs would be floating around out there, but I'd be willing to say that a pair of those gauntlets would be quite a collector's item in the future. I mean, really, I'd say they're one of the most iconic items to have come out of that fortress, so it's just kind of fun to think about for me. Anyways, we do have plenty of other dwarves to look into, such as everyone's favorite, Venomblood. Just wow, huh? I can't believe he survived this entire time, all bit up by a giant cave spider at the beginning, and then he managed to survive through childhood into adulthood. I mean, sure, he's got a little bit of a limp, has to use a crutch now, but never really stopped him. Now, how could he fit into the Grand Lancer's future? Well, as we had seen, he's not much of a warrior, so I'd like to picture him more of a scholar, or perhaps a diplomat. I personally would really like to think that the dwarves of this new nation tried to mend fences with the untamed kingdoms in the south, the ones who eventually stole the foundations of City Seduce. And I think Venomblood would be just a dwarf for the task. Maybe not an exciting task per se, but Venomblood really isn't the most exciting dwarf. He doesn't care for excitement, and so I think he'd be perfectly suited to the task. Oh, and just a side note here, I had noticed while looking at Twinklefold's history, it says something to the effect of, in 235, some 100 great horned owl men from the Barbs of Outrage joined with the Fenced Coalition at Twinklefold's, which is really interesting. I don't think I've ever seen a note like that while looking through a site's history. Not to mention that it's great horned owl men. a being that can be connected to learning and wisdom. And then the Fence Coalition, that's the group that stole our book, they claim to be preservers of knowledge, and they're also the ones who run the library there. So I thought that was fairly apt. And on top of that, even stranger, is that this human civilization here, one of their gods is a great horned owl man. So I'm curious if there's some sort of a connection there. Probably not, in terms of game mechanics anyways, but it really just seems like an odd coincidence to me. Yeah, I figured I'd share that real quick. Pretty cool, right? Now then, moving on. Well, we do have a bunch of other interesting dwarves who are living in Tramelwhip now. Zan Stukosnar, the Overseer, as well as Ratbite, our ever-trusty blacksmith, and also one of 2 surviving dwarves who were the founders of Ushangvagush, by the way. And then of course we have all the dwarves that were out in the fortress, as well as the ones that were in Batkiller Court. All of our favorite remaining dwarves are now safely in Tramelwhip, probably partaking in their usual duties, I would imagine anyways. That being said, there are still a couple of loose ends, dwarves who were not in the fortress when it ended, such as Asen Nebelkel, former leader of the Brass Spikes, and one of the greatest tacticians to ever grace the realm of oracles. Now Asen was kicked out of the fortress right in that last episode. Oh, hey now, just found a better way to look at the map. Now I know. Anyways, Asen was kicked out of Ushangvagush to silvery duty, which I'm not sure she even reached, honestly. I mean, it's pretty much honor system at that point. If she did end up going there, I can't imagine she stayed for very long. Such a willful dwarf. No, I like to picture Asen as kind of a wanderer, like a roving warrior or something. Perhaps a mercenary. That'd be pretty cool, huh? I could really picture Asen going out there and hunting down criminals, collecting gold. You know, it's a shame she never got a nickname in the fortress, because that'd be a great bounty hunter name. Oh well. I like to think that Asen moved north, through the goblin territory, and into these human lands up here, where it's a bit colder, and this is just kind of her area of operation. There's a lot of crime up here, a lot of goblin activity, plenty of work. Will she ever again see her friends from Ushangvagush? Well, I can't say for sure, but it's neat to think that one day she might. Who knows? Now let's move on to another warrior dwarf, who left Ushangvagush quite a while ago. I'm talking about Ingiz. That probably doesn't sound familiar, he never got a nickname either, but he was a leader of the Griffins of Steel. Sound familiar? We had taken that goblin fortress a few episodes ago, Maze Monstrous, and we decided to keep, I believe it was the Granite Hoods and the Griffins of Steel there, as kind of a garrison. But then shortly after, we received reports that the place was getting attacked by both goblins and elves. They seemed to kind of be working in tandem. Just a testament to how much we roiled things up out here. And you know, I'm not too sure what came of this guy, honestly. We had never done anything with this place after we stationed these dwarves here. They never had any backup, and if they continued getting attacked like that, then, well, not feeling terribly hopeful about their prospects. So again, I find myself not too sure what came of this dwarf or the other dwarves who lived here. This might be a good time to suggest that if you have any ideas of what might have happened to any of the dwarves in this episode, just write them in the comments below, and I would really love to look through those. I always love seeing what you guys come up with. Very entertaining. Now then, let's continue. But before we get entirely off the subject of the Griffins of Steel, let's remember back to how they were created. You may remember that a long time ago we had a dwarf named Bomrek, who was supposed to be the fortress's explorer, and he was the very first dwarf to have left our fortress, and his first mission was to explore the goblin fortress right to our north, which he did. That was pretty exciting. Now, Bomrek was one of our sponsored dwarves, and in total there were 11 of these guys in the fortress. Now, I've tried not to bring these guys up too much more than is necessary throughout the course of this series, just because, as I've said in the past, they are chosen from my patrons on Patreon. And I really don't want to make it seem like I'm fishing for new patrons over here, you know? I'm really not like that, you're gonna have to trust me. This was just a fun little experiment to see what I could do. And I hope you keep doing it in the future too. Because overall, I think it worked out pretty well. It gave me a good chance to get to know these dwarves a little bit better. Anyways, on that note, let's have a look at the other sponsored dwarves, just real quick. Now, Bomrek was the explorer. He went on a couple of missions, but then ended up getting killed by a were-tapir. Fairly unclimactic. That's life of a dwarf right there. But if you want to talk about one of the more interesting sponsored dwarves, we have Endok, the Hornet. I'm sure we all remember him, a surly bastard of a dwarf, who saved the entire fortress at one point by killing an Etten when all the other warriors were away. Remember that? That was actually really cool. Just one-on-one versus an Etten, took the thing down. But then towards the end there, he kind of lost it, and went berserk, started killing dwarves left and right. Yeah, it was a mess. Oh yeah, that's right, he killed that Titan too. Yeah, a very notable dwarf there. But in the end, he had to be put down. Quite a damn shame. Oh well. Another interesting note about Endok is that we could have really used his hand when taking over Tramelwhip, because as fate would have it, there were a family of 3 Ettins living in the fortress. Mother, father, and child. Which I thought was pretty damn interesting. Well, the dwarves must have taken him out no problem, but it still would have been easier if old Endok was around. Ah well. Anyways, After him we have Adil Enolatus, who is a guards dwarf in the fortress, as well as our hammerer, for a couple of years anyways. I hadn't mentioned it, but he spent most of his time chasing monsters around the fortress. Cave crocodiles, crundles, that sort of stuff. Nothing too interesting. And then unfortunately he was killed while he was training in the barracks. A siege had shown up, and he was surprised by a troll, who ended up putting him down, in fairly quick fashion too. There wasn't much we could do about it. A damn shame, I saw great potential in him. Now Adil had a daughter too, Kivish, who survived till the end of Monsterkiller, which I thought was pretty cool. Currently 10 years old, almost an adult, and although both of her parents have passed away, I have high hopes for this girl. Time will tell what's in store for her. Good luck, Kivish. Moving on, we have Obak Vebak Kutsas, the fortress's scholar. Now you may remember that he originally wanted to be an alchemist, but had to settle for being a scholar after he built the library, the Palace of Howls. I think that's what we called it. Now this is an interesting dwarf here, because he did serve his job as a scholar fairly well. He never actually wrote any books, but he maintained our library well enough. Things only really started going downhill for this guy when he became apprenticed to Aquos, the human lord, who was also a scholar in our fortress. Now it would appear that Obak, Aquos, and Aspa, the damn thief who stole our book, were working together to do so, and I'm not too sure why. We're still not very clear on why the humans wanted that book so bad, but after seeing what those prophecies inside could do to a dwarf, or an entire fortress for that matter, well, I guess we have to think that there's something interesting about the thing. But whatever the case, he is now gone, having been fed to Stalkab, the forgotten beast. What a gruesome end. Moving on once more, we can see here Olin Udar Dodak and Feb Kikrostroza, two damn fine military dwarves. You know, I was really thinking when I took military dwarves as sponsored dwarves, that these guys would be goners almost immediately. I never would have thought they'd survive till the end. That's completely ridiculous. Olin here is a fairly standard warrior, armed with an axe, and he used to have a pet duck a few years ago that was killed by beast gases or something. But I always thought it was funny to see this warrior dwarf with a pet duck. Certainly a character. And then Feb over here, he was one of the dwarves who were invited into Batkiller Court. Him and his wife were, but his wife was killed in that last goblin siege right before the dwarves were called into the safe area. And I think after that he started to lose it. And actually another interesting part of this guy, Feb dreams of ruling the world, which I don't think I've ever seen on a dwarf. I know that goblins sometimes dream of this, but not dwarves, and so I always found that kind of intriguing. Perhaps that's how he wormed his way into Batkiller Court. Wouldn't that be interesting? Perhaps he saw his chance to strike, or perhaps he's still waiting to do so. Very interesting. Another mystery. On to our next pair of sponsored dwarves. Here we see Shorast Agathragoth, one of our military dwarves, as well as Rakkust Ralakgos, who's one of our blacksmiths. Shorast was a decent fighter. In fact, at one point he had taken on a were-tapir all by himself, and was able to kill the creature without getting bitten. And that's pretty damn cool. And he was also one of the dwarves who was involved with the incident. You may remember a few episodes ago, where a stray ballista bolt kind of, killed a lot of dwarves. Yeah, he was in that hallway, somehow he survived, and only his leg was grazed. But I mean, it's still ripped open. But he ended up healing up pretty okay, and he gets around fine now. And Rakkust over here, he's a blacksmith and also a very grouchy fellow. He never wanted anything to do with anybody else, just kind of wanted to be by himself, I guess. And nothing really ever came of him until he was stricken by a fell mood and decided to turn one of our doctors into a crown. Now worn by Queen Obak, the rat bastard. Now both these guys here I have to assume are suffering from a little bit of PTSD perhaps. They were both in fairly foul moods by the end, and they were throwing tantrums left and right, but I just never got around to exiling them. Hopefully they'll recover in time. They're away from that place now, in a new home. Hopefully a much calmer home. And up next we have two more sponsored dwarves, Zan Ainalostooth, Usheng Bagush's bookkeeper, and Ezem Agatstukos, who was the fortress's priest. Now unfortunately for these guys, they never really accomplished anything too notable in the fortress. Zan was our bookkeeper, which he did just a bang up job at for quite a few years, but then he eventually went insane, stripped off all his clothes and started just wandering around the fortress. Sensible. And Ezem started to get a bit unhinged towards the end, throwing tantrums and stuff, And another interesting note, he did have a pet bunny, which he cared for quite some time. Until the end, I suppose. You poor dwarves. Now that is 10 sponsored dwarves out of the way, and we have one left. A fan favorite, and our very first sponsored dwarf, Dusum. What a character, huh? He's been around forever, and he's a big fan of those cows. Just gotta love him. something I had neglected to note here. Over in Bat-Killer Court, if you look at these rooms, they're all fairly the same, but Dewsum's room has an additional room off on the side here, and that is where Bomrek, his pet cow, is buried. You know, for as lucky and as interesting as Dewsum is, Bomrek the cow is actually fairly interesting as well. Now, Bomrek the cow arrived in the same migrant group that Dewsum arrived in, and shortly after Dewsum took the thing as a pet, and he's had Bomrek as a pet up till the very end here. He had at one point 3 pet cows, 2 of which were killed during a goblin siege, but not Bomrek, his first cow. Somehow that one escaped, and he's been able to maintain it and keep it safe all the way till the end. Now damn me, I forgot to mention it in the episode, but Bomrek died at the very beginning of the year 266, Monsterkiller's last year. And as far as I could tell, this cow is the only thing to have ever died of natural causes in the fortress, which is kinda sad, yeah. But still an interesting note, I suppose. And so at the time of Dewsum's departure from the fortress, he had no cows, which really kinda stinks. But, back to my little headcanon here, I like to picture the dwarves settled into their new fortress up here, Trammelwhip. But then over here to the east, we have an area known as the Misty Fields, a temperate grassland. I like to picture Dewsum starting up a ranch. I think that'd be pretty cool. And maybe now he has a bunch of cows, right? The first dwarven rancher. Wouldn't that be something? I mean, it seems to make sense, right? Yeah, I don't think it could happen any other way. What a lucky dwarf, I'll tell you. And that'll about do it for most of the notable dwarves. Most of the notable dwarves. You see, we still have to talk about one who does not live in Trammelwhip. And in fact, she never left Ushengvagush. Of course, I'm talking about our former queen, Obak Sodalum, the Bat Killer. But you know what, you bearded bastards? I just got through recording this entire episode, and it ended up being 40 minutes long, which is a bit much, I think. So I'm just gonna split the thing in half and put out this part as it is. And then next episode will continue on. And I'll tell you what, it's a doozy. Some pretty good stuff in there. You're not gonna wanna miss it. I hope. And hopefully it'll be going up within the next couple days. My schedule's been a terrible mess lately and I'm totally sorry, but you gotta do what you gotta do. Anyways, thank you for watching, you bearded bastards. And I'll talk to you when part 2 comes out. And until then, you bearded bastards.